Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. I just thought about you this morning, and here you are. Maybe not even this morning. I think it was more like this afternoon, around 2 or 3 o'clock this afternoon. I thought about you. I was wondering how you were doing. Good to see you too. We are in the middle of the 2nd chapter of the Gita, and I think we're on text 38. Yeah, we finished with text 38 last time round. And then we'll just we'll start off with it again. Sukha dukkhe same kritva. Making yourself the same in happiness or distress. Labha alabhau jaya ajayau, in gain or loss, in victory or defeat. Tato yudhaya yujasva. Therefore you should yoke yourself to the fight, to the cause of fighting, for the purpose of fighting. Yudhaya means for the purpose of fighting, for the fight. You should yujasva. You should yoga yourself. Same root. Yuj is the same root for yoga. You should join yourself to the cause of fighting. Na evam papam avapsyasi. And you will not achieve any sin by doing all this. So this is chapter 2, text 38. In my book, it's page 104, excuse me. Page 104 in my book. Sukha dukkhe samokritva. Sukha dukkhe same kritva. Labha alabhau jaya ajayau. Make yourself the same in happiness and distress, in gain and loss, in victory and defeat. Tato yudhaya yujasva. And you must yoke yourself to the fight. Naivam papam avapsyasi. And by doing this, you will not achieve any sin. Now this verse is somewhat multivalent in that it has two properties. It has two properties it's exhibiting. On one hand, the verse is addressing an argument Arjuna made in the 1st chapter, where he opined that if he fought, it would be a sinful act. Now, there's no word in Sanskrit for evil. Evil is a dualistic concept. The word evil in English, not etymologically, but the way the term is used nowadays theologically. The word evil is an idea that there are fundamental forces, ontologically basic fundamental forces, essential, irreducible forces. And there's a force of good, and there's a force of evil. That, of course, deifies evil and makes evil an eternal principle most basic principle of reality. In a lot of ways, it moves against an omnipotent God if you view that God as all good, because now you've got this all-powerful, ever-existent, fully basic, intrinsic evil that you can't explain because you have an all-good God who created the universe, but then you've got this fundamentally basic evil. Now you could say that we turned away from divinity and that's what created evil, in which case evil would not be a fundamental quality, it would be a transient quality that could be reversed, rehabilitated. Therefore there would be no Satan, there would be no devil, there would be no hell, because there would always be an opportunity to change that intermediate or derivative quality of evil back to the fundamental quality of goodness, which was the only thing that truly existed. When you start to postulate that no, you run out of chances, you go to hell forever, you go to jail forever, there's a Satan, there's demons, there's fundamental evil, some people are truly bad, then what you're doing is you're deifying evil. And you're saying that it's a fundamental feature of the universe, which is philosophically problematic. At least it's theologically problematic for the reasons I mentioned. The Gita does not believe, or there's no word in Sanskrit for evil. There's no word in the entire Sanskrit language for the concept we have of a fundamental, basic evil. There is, however, there are many words for forbidden actions, for actions that give you bad karma, for actions which are verboten, which are prohibited, condemned. But then it becomes a hate the sin, not the sinner type situation, where there's no one who is truly fundamentally bad, even though people might do things which are negative, which are unbeneficial, which are cruel even, which are sinful even. The word pap in Sanskrit means sin. And so Arjuna had this idea that it was fundamentally wrong to fight. He advanced that argument. He shared his opinion with Krishna. And you could say that, and reasonably so, and this is what Krishna's doing. Krishna is rebutting. He is combating, challenging Arjuna's conclusion. And he's saying that if you do your duty and you fight because it's the right thing to do in this given circumstance where people are going to suffer needlessly if you don't get in the way, because all it takes for evil to succeed, the English saying, is for good people to do nothing. And so Arjuna has to step in harm's way as a good Samaritan. And if he doesn't do so, then bad things are going to happen, and it's going to happen on his watch. So this statement, it's an argument that you have your duty, that you should do your duty, that sometimes your duty may have a negative outcome, but if it's the right thing to do, then you should do it irrespective of the outcome. It's an argument for a duty-based ethic as opposed to a results-based ethic. It's an argument that the ends doesn't justify the means, but you should do the right thing, and that's the best way to live in this world. And so he challenges and reverses, really, Arjuna's argument and says that, in fact, if you do this, you fight with the right attitude for this just cause in a detached manner, then you'll never become sinful. You'll never do something sinful. That will never be a sinful act. A sin will never accrue to you. You'll never become bound by that action. Just like a police officer in the unavoidable discharge of his duty, if he or she is forced to draw their firearm and fire, and there's nothing else they can do. Like I watched a video of a police officer who was begging the criminal to stop coming towards him with a knife, and he just wouldn't. And he finally charged him and he shot him dead. The whole thing was captured on his body cam on the side of the freeway. Maybe it was a suicide by cop. Maybe the guy was crazy. It doesn't really matter. There was no charges against that officer. He had no choice. He did everything he could to avoid a lethal recourse, but there was no other recourse, and so he did what he had to do. Now you could argue he should have shot the person with his taser. I don't know. I wouldn't shoot somebody with a taser if they were charging me with a knife, because if you are not able to incapacitate them with a taser, or if you miss, then you won't have time to drop your taser and deploy your firearm and shoot him, because the taser is only effective up to 15 feet. Once he's inside that range, he's too close to you for you to be able to drop the taser, pick up your firearm, and shoot. Under 20 feet, your chances go way, way down in being able to quick draw. And if the guy's got a knife, what can you do? Why should that police officer risk getting stabbed to death by some psycho because some idiot decided to charge him with a knife? The knife is a deadly weapon. Why shouldn't a police officer respond with a deadly weapon? In fact, if there were a police officer, if there were rules against police officers doing that, and they were forced to use non-lethal means to protect themselves against lethal weapons, I think that would be criminal. I think that would actually be a crime. To expect a police officer to shoot somebody with a taser. It's profoundly stupid and unfair and bigoted and racist against the police officers themselves. And so there would be massive legal challenges if that was ever a standard in the police department. And it would be a foolish standard, foolhardy, just an awful standard to boot, which would be fundamentally immoral, because it's bigoted against the police officers who are protecting and serving, and it's for the criminals. And what's at stake? The life of the police officer. You're an ex-cop. You agree with me?
Yes, sir, 100%. It actually states in the state of Illinois, they got a penal code section, and you can go above the record, and you will not be deemed the aggressor.
Yeah, right. You can escalate if there's a threat. But and so what to speak of making a law that you must de-escalate the threat, that's preposterous. So if a police officer, in the unavoidable discharge of his or her duty, is obliged to deploy violence, even lethal violence, it's not considered to be criminal, because they were doing their duty. They were protecting and serving. So because the fight that Arjuna was going to be engaged in was legitimate, then irrespective of his concerns, I'll get bad karma. No, that's not his. Just like with a legal system, which is designed to represent really honestly, a legal system is designed to represent the will of God. We the people, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equally and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Inevitably, whenever you write a document like the Constitution, you make reference to a Creator, to the fundamental rights, to the basic rights of man, to the essential rights of people. And those rights are understood to be the fabric of the universe, the basic fundamental principles that govern a fair and civilized society, and they're presented in those terms. They're presented, and especially in a country like the U.S., where we're trying to separate church and state, we hold that all men are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You've got in that statement the invoking of a Creator and the fundamental laws of reality that are being copied down by the framers of the Constitution. And you'll find similar language everywhere. Even if they get rid of the concept of a Creator, they necessarily get to these are the basic rights that govern all people. These are the basic rights that must be there for a group of people to live together in a civilized manner. This is the bedrock of any true civilization. They make these absolutist arguments. It's not just our opinion or our arbitrary way of doing things, but these are the fundamental laws of reality. And what they're really doing is deifying those laws and making those laws eternal primordial truths that you are then discovering, but you are not inventing. Just like Newton discovered the classical laws of physics rather than inventing them because they existed before him. So an argument is being made that it's a fundamental principle that you should defend the weak. It's a fundamental principle that you should step into harm's way to protect the innocent. And because that's what Arjuna was doing, therefore no sin attached itself to him. And in the same way, a legal system actually says no sin attaches itself to you, ergo, you broke no law. Therefore, there are no consequences for you because you were acting in self-defense. Similarly, from a universal cosmic perspective, there's also a legal code, and Krishna's making an argument that there is no sin which attaches itself to you. There is no karma. There is no punishment because what you're doing is noble. Provided you do the right thing and you do it for the right reason. And the right reason here is because it should be done. Because it should be done. Kritavyam, because it is to be done. Not because you're going to get the result you want. Not because you're going to get a good reputation. Not because you're going to become famous. But because it's the right thing to do. And so this is a challenge to Arjuna's previous position. However, it's multivalent because in addition to Krishna responding to Arjuna's previous argument that I'll become sinful if I do this, or rather I'll commit a sin, which is different than saying I'll be evil. It means I'll do something wrong as opposed to I am something wrong. So the general difference that's usually made when defining guilt and shame. I've done something wrong versus I am something wrong. And so, in addition to Krishna making this argument to Arjuna, he also simultaneously is sowing the seeds or foreshadowing or priming the pump for an argument that's to come, which is the argument for yoga. He actually uses the word yuj, which means yoga yourself to. Yujasva, he's ordering. He's telling Arjuna, you should do this, you must do this. And so he's instructing Arjuna to yoga himself or join himself or unite himself with the principle that he should do his duty and fight. And that word yuj, the root of yoga, this next section, the section that we're going to start diving into today, in fact deals with the concept of yoga. And yoga gets defined in 3 places in the Gita, 2 times here, and 1 time in the 6th chapter. A proper definition both contains the word that's being defined as well as the meaning of the word. And so Krishna mentions twice in the verses that will follow right now a definition for yoga. But he's introduced it very cleverly. So he's wrapped up the previous section wherein he's challenging Arjuna's arguments in the 1st chapter, arguments he largely ignored while he laid down a baseline, the baseline being that you're not the body, you're a spirit soul. He ignored Arjuna's arguments. He laid down a baseline of philosophy, a starting point for discussing things. You are a soul. Okay, somebody says, hey, what do you think good education looks like? Well, the starting place is, what does a good person look like? And then once we determine what a good person looks like, then we can decide that a good education would be a vehicle to get to somebody being a good person. You follow? In other words, the means to get to becoming a good person then becomes good education. But if you don't decide on what constitutes a good person or the result of a good education, then how can you figure out if your methodology is going to have the highest probability of resulting in that occurrence? So you have to decide, this is the result we're looking for. And therefore, because this is the result we're looking for, this is the methodology which is most favorable to that. You guys following this? So Krishna doesn't start by attacking Arjuna's arguments, which are poorly founded, although quite clever, well, astute in some ways, intelligent, well thought out, but fundamentally ignorant. Rather than even dealing with Krishna's arguments, Krishna just lays down a baseline of reality, that you are the soul, not the body. Therefore, anything we talk about in terms of duty or morality or right or wrong or this or that ignores that or goes against that must be wrong. In fact, when you think that I'm the soul and not the body, then the pleasures and pains of this world, which come and go like the rising and setting of the sun, become immediately much less important. So Krishna lays down that baseline, and now in the last half a dozen verses, he's gone back and he's attacked Arjuna's specific arguments from all the way back in the first chapter. And this verse ends that discussion. And it simultaneously introduces the next discussion, because it contains the word yoga, or at least the verbal root of the word yoga, just like spectator, spectacle, inspection, introspection. All those words have the root spec, which is to see. And so you can look at all those words: spectacle, spectator, inspection, inspector, introspection. And you can notice that they all have the word spec within them. And therefore they're all cognate to one another and related to one another, with various suffixes and prefixes that change the meaning. Similarly, the word yoga has a root. The root is huge. It's a verbal root. It means to unite. You find that word being used here, and then the subject which is going to be dealt with next is yoga. In fact, it doesn't just end there. You also find this idea of making yourself the same. Samekritva. Making yourself the same. Sama in Sanskrit means same. It's where you get the English word same from. They both have the same root. Sama. Same. They both have the same root. And so you make yourself equal, whether you win or lose, whether you're victorious or not, whether you get a good reputation or not. You do the right thing because it's the right thing, irrespective of the fallout or result. That argument is the precursor for the definition of yoga. In fact, Krishna's first definition of yoga, in just a few verses, is going to be samatvam yoga uchate. Yoga sta kuru karmani. Do your duty situated in yoga. Siddhya siddhyo samobudva. Being the same in success or failure. Samatvam, equanimity, equalness. Yoga uchate is called yoga. That equalness in siddhi asiddhya, in perfection or imperfection, in success or failure. That samobudva, be the same. And samatvam, that sameness, the same word. Samatva, samobudva, same kritva. It's all the same word. It's the word same. Yoga uchate. That's called yoga. So this verse here is this incredible multivalent verse that simultaneously does two things. It wraps up the preceding section, which we've been studying for weeks now, and it introduces and foreshadows the subsequent section. Did you guys follow that? Did you follow that? I'll say it again. This verse does two things simultaneously. It wraps up Krishna's argument with Arjuna that you won't become sinful by doing the right thing, even if there's some fallout. And it introduces the definition of yoga. The word pop links it to the preceding section, which is where sin was discussed. And Krishna opines on that and gives his verdict on that, makes an argument for that. But he also introduces the term yoga by using the same word yoga. Yujasva is the same word yoga. Also uses the word sama, same. And he says, suke duke, same kritva, be the same, being the same, in happiness, distress. Labha alabhao, jaya ajayao, in gain or loss, victory, defeat. Tato yudhaya yujasva, you yoga yourself to this fight for the sake of fighting. And then naivam papam avapsyasi, you won't achieve any sin by doing that. This whole jaya ajaya, victory or defeat, lab alab, gain or loss, sukha dukkha, happiness, distress. It's the very same language Krishna's going to use in just a few verses to describe what yoga is. It's the sameness irrespective of what happens, whether it's favorable or unfavorable. So he's actually beginning to define the word yoga here before he said, now I'm going to define yoga. And he's linking the previous ideas to the subsequent ideas and showing how they flow together naturally. Like an expert DJ. Like an expert DJ will take one record and he will seam it together and marry it together with the next record, so that one beat, which is similar to the beat of the other record, then there's a fade out and a fade in. And that's one of the, before there was scratching, before there was all sorts of different additional techniques that were employed by artists in New York in the 70s that became synonymous with hip-hop and what DJs do. There were the original DJs. There were DJs, there's a whole thing. There's a whole movement in Jamaica, almost like a pre-reggae movement in Jamaica, a pre-ska movement in Jamaica, where they had these DJs who would have a kit and they would have albums, singles and what have you, and they would set up and wear cloaks and have a scepter and wear a crown and have fancy names, and they would play at these parties. People would dance. They were dance hall type events, and they were these masters of the music. So they would get the latest music, usually coming out of England or the US, and then they would play songs and sometimes speak over the songs and come out with all this fanfare as royalty. And they had crowns and scepters and cloaks and fancy clothes, almost like a pimp. But, in, urban Jamaica back in the 40s and 50s. And they would play music. And then there began this ability to merge one song with the next to create an unending stream of music, sometimes accompanied by speaking, but it was sewn together and it was smooth, and you almost don't know where one song ends and where the other begins. That eventually gave rise to scratching, which became all the rage and the definitive feature of the DJ. But then recently, over the last 20 years or so, there's been a resurgence of disco through EDM, through techno music. There's been a resurgence of this feature of the DJ. Sometimes they add in bass drops and other ornamental features of electronica because they have that equipment available to them on the stage right there in real time. But there's also this seaming together of one album into another, which is why they usually have 2 or 3 turntables going simultaneously so they can fade one in and fade the other out. Krishna's doing the same thing here. And it's so deft. It's so expert. I'm stunned when I read it, and I'm trying to share it with you, but I don't know if you have the prerequisite knowledge of our tradition and its philosophy to actually even appreciate what I'm trying to say. To be honest, I've tried to explain it as plainly as I can so that if somebody's intelligent and they're listening carefully and they understand English at whatever level I'm speaking, they'll be able to follow it. But I'm still not sure you guys got it, because who knows? You might be spaced out, or you might not have the same vocabulary I have. But I've done the best I can to honor and replicate and shine a light on and recap what Krishna just did. And I'm going to say it one more time. If you watch a DJ seamlessly move from one song to another and you can't even tell where the first artist's song ended and the next artist's song began, if you've appreciated that before in your life, then you appreciate this dance in between the chapters and this amazing ability that some people have to connect things. And so what you've got here is you have one such verse. There are many in the Gita like this, maybe a dozen. This one is particularly beautiful. It's the first time Krishna's done this. And so he has ignored Arjuna's arguments. Then he jumped into Arjuna's argument and said, yeah, go gain fame, become a warrior. Yeah, you'll go to heaven. Yeah, everybody will speak of your fame if you fight, and they'll criticize if you don't fight. So surely you should fight. Don't be a eunuch. Don't be impotent. Don't be weak. Fight your battle. And that argument was a little rough, because if you know the whole Gita, you know that ultimately Krishna says fame and infamy, gain and loss, victory and defeat, happiness and distress, these are just poor man's concepts. We need to evolve beyond them to get to a place where we're steady in both. And so you might wonder, why is Krishna making that argument? Well, this verse gives you joy. Because right after Krishna says it, he gives this verse, which does indicate that there should be equanimity in gain or loss, sukha dukkha, in victory or defeat, in happiness or distress. Sukha dukkha, labha alabha, and jaya ajay. Victory and defeat, gain and loss, happiness and distress. So right there, you're appreciative, because Krishna's made it clear he's not a coarse materialist. Second, you might have wondered, well, what did Arjuna, he was talking about you'll be sinful if you don't fight. And so, how come Krishna never responded to him? Here he responds to him, definitively. No. And what's his response? No, there's something called duty, and if you do your duty with the right mood. Because let's say you're a cop and you're doing your duty, but you really hate the people that you're shooting. And it's proven that you hate them. It's proven. They find a recording of you saying you hate black people and then you shoot a black person. That's a serious problem, because there's this motive, which is a critical feature of a crime. Motive ends up becoming like a mens rea type thing, a bad mind, along with actus reus, and sometimes even an action. Then they start to question, well, was there another way of doing it? How do I know that you weren't doing this because you hated that person? it gets a little nebulous. It gets dicey. So your mind, a crime requires mens rea and actus reus. It requires a bad mind and a bad act. If you perform a bad act, but you do it accidentally, that's not a crime. You have to do a bad act and have a bad mindset. For serious crimes, for almost all crimes. There are a few exceptions to this, like breaking traffic laws, stuff like that. But for instance, if you run down a child in cold blood, but you didn't see him, it's manslaughter. If you weren't drunk, you didn't see him, it's manslaughter. They have to attach purposeful action. It has to be purposed. What was traditionally called mens rea, a bad mind. Then when that merges with the bad act, it becomes a crime. This is the foundation of law going back, hundreds and hundreds of years. This stuff goes all the way back eventually to the Magna Carta, 1200s. And there's precursors to that. But even in Western law, it goes back almost 1,000 years. So, Krishna makes a really elegant argument. If you do the right thing for the right reason, you're golden. It's a powerful argument. An argument which is in many ways very legal, very constitutional. He also manages to weigh in on a duty-based versus an acts-based ethic, where you're realizing that the ends don't justify the means. You should do the right thing, damn the consequences. So now on one hand, he fixes the ledge he walked out on with the, hey, fight and get a good name for yourself. Simultaneously addresses Arjuna's argument and makes a really elegant moral argument. And then simultaneously, a third thing that happens is he introduces the idea of yoga with the root yuj in the word yujasva. You must yoke yourself to this. You must yoga yourself to this. And he also introduces the idea of equanimity, same kritva. And those are the key elements of the definition of yoga he's about to give. When he says samatvam yoga uchate, yoga stakru karmani. If you do your work, samobhutva, being the same, then samatvam, that equanimity, yoga uchate is called yoga. And so he actually defines the term yoga. But amazingly, it would be like as if before I use the word, it would be almost like if I was to say to you, let me opine something to you. And let me tell you what constitutes a worthwhile opinion. So I'm telling you, I'm using the word opine, I'm using the word opinion as a verb, and then afterwards I say, let me get into it and actually tell you what the basics of a decent, reasonable, astute opinion consists of. And I start to break down the word opinion so that you can understand it. But I use the word in my precursor in a different form to wet your whistle, to prime the pump, to move the needle. And so Krishna manages to do all three things simultaneously in this verse. All right. And then the next verse. So, do thou, here's Prabhupada's translation, it's really slick. Do thou fight for the sake of fighting without considering happiness or distress, loss or gain, victory or defeat, and by so doing you shall never incur sin. It sounds almost biblical, but the verse, it's a commandment. Krishna uses imperative language here. And so the verse has that flavor to it. And so Prabhupada honors it. It sounds almost a little biblical, very definitive, very legal. Almost like you might see in a Magna Carta or some great legal document from the days gone by. So Prabhupada honors the flavor of the verse in his translation, which he doesn't always do. Sometimes a little more plain English. This is a little more stilted tones and archaic verbiage and so on. Thus far, I have described this knowledge to you through analytical study. Now listen as I explain it in terms of working without fruitive results. When you act in such knowledge, you can free yourself from the bondage of works. So, Eshate, this to you, abhihita sankhya, explained in the Sankhya. This has been explained to you in Sankhya terms. In Sankhya terms. Sankhya means enumeration. Sankhya is the branch of ancient Indian philosophy that define things ontologically. The equivalent of Sankhya in modern day thought would be molecular science, where you get a periodic chart of the elements. Like, what's the difference between iron and steel? Who knows? What's the difference between iron and steel?
Steel is an alloy.
Steel is an alloy, and what's iron? What's iron? If steel is an alloy, what's iron?
Iron is not an alloy.
Right. It's what?
It's a natural, like, I can't remember. It's on the chemical chart. An element, yeah.
It's a naturally occurring element. You find iron in nature. You dig it up like a rock. Iron is a basic ore. It's a basic natural element you can find in nature. It's somewhat brittle. It's not super malleable. It lacks some structural integrity. Therefore, we don't build out of iron. We build out of steel. And when you make steel, you mix carbon, a couple percent's carbon, a couple of percent manganese, I believe, is also thrown in the mix. And you mix that in with the iron, and that forms an alloy. The alloy is not naturally occurring in nature. You can't dig it up anywhere. You dig up the iron ore, which steel is 95% iron ore, and then you mix it with these other elements that you can also find in nature, and the resulting compound, the alloy, is so much stronger. You follow? It's so much stronger. But it is derivative. It's derivative of iron. There is a parent material that is then turned into something else. So you look at the world, and the world is filled with a bunch of people and drums and garlands, flowers and neck beads and water bottles that are super gross and are about as clean as a toilet seat. And so you find all these things, fanny packs, which have made a comeback, along with traditional DJing. And so, you find all these things around, or your earrings, and, just random stuff. But if you look at it all through a microscope, you find that all those derivative compiled products are ultimately made up of a bunch of molecules, which are made up of atoms, which are made up of subatomic particles, which are made up of subatomic particles, which is as far as our microscopes will allow us to go. And those are the fundamental particles. Now we're getting into quantum mechanics. But they are the fundamental particles of existence, and they are governed by fundamental forces, and the fundamental particles and the fundamental forces give rise to the world that you see. That seems so different and variegated, but actually it's just those fundamental particles and those fundamental forces mixed together in infinite ways, the same way you mix red and blue and yellow together in a classic color scheme, or you mix four colors together in the printing scheme that's used nowadays in printing, and you end up with an infinite amount of different colors. So the periodic chart of the elements, molecular science, that's what Sankhya was to the ancient Indian philosophers. And Sankhya was a way of looking at the world and making a core distinction. And the core distinction was that there is life and there is matter, and those two things have different facets. Have different features. That you don't get life from chemicals, which is called abiogenesis, by the way. You can't get life from chemicals. Rather, life comes from life. Consciousness is irreducible. Consciousness is not derivative of chemical states. It rather represents a basic fundamental element of reality. There may be brainwave, chemical, electrical correlates of consciousness, but they themselves do not create consciousness. They're rather correlates. When consciousness is present, you find a certain waves of the brain function. But that doesn't mean that those brain waves and their electrochemical synapses create consciousness. Because chemicals don't have free will and thoughts about other chemicals. And when you look at emergent phenomena in the world, you find that those emergent phenomena are always traceable very easily to the original causes. And they might seem cool or different like steel, but ultimately you can break it down and say that's carbon and that's manganese. But you can't break down consciousness into its chemical correlates and recreate it. Consciousness, what did I say? Yeah. You can't break consciousness down into its chemical correlates and recreate it. And therefore it is reasonable to say that consciousness is an irreducible facet of reality. In fact, this hard problem of consciousness within philosophy of mind, within the field of philosophy, is a current affair, with philosophers on both sides of the issue still submitting papers to peer-reviewed journals and getting published. This is still a current affair. This argument I just made still holds water today amongst the best thinkers in the world. Sankhya was a periodic chart of the elements, but the primary thing Sankhya did, which was not done by molecular science, is it distinguished that consciousness was different fundamentally than matter. It was its own thing. It's not derivative of matter. In fact, in many ways you could say that matter is derivative of consciousness, because consciousness precedes any intelligible, objective look at matter. In fact, consciousness is the least doubtable thing in creation, because conscious is what you've been since the day you woke up in this world. It's the least doubtable thing in your life. So Krishna says, this to you has been explained according to Sankhya. Sankhya is the idea that you're not the body, that you're the soul. Buddhi yoga tu imam shrinu. But now, listen to this according to Buddhi yoga. Buddhi yoga. Buddhi sounds like booty, but it also sounds like another word. Buddhi sounds like Buddha, the intelligent one, the enlightened one. And so the word buddhi in Sanskrit means intelligence or enlightenment. Buddhi yoga, the yoga of intelligence. The word buddhi in buddhi yoga, the adjective buddhi, intelligence, intelligent yoga, the intelligence is the idea that you're not the body that's just been explained. So Krishna teaches yoga after he teaches Sankhya, because you need the philosophical framework of Sankhya to then go and do the yoga. Remember earlier in class where I said if you want to talk about education, you have to figure out what the result of that education is supposed to be, and then you can figure out if that system is going to get you to that result. Similarly, if you want to talk about yoga, the precursor to be able to talk about yoga is you have to understand that you are not your body, that you're a soul, and that mechanism allows you to act in this world but not be attached to the results. Without the idea that you're the soul and not the body, there's not much of a reason to be detached. There's not much of a reason to be zen. There's not much of a reason to do your duty but not get too attached to the results. There needs to be a philosophical framework that's a precursor to making solid arguments for yoga. And in fact, Krishna's done just that. He gave us a philosophical framework, and that philosophical framework in one word in the Sanskrit language is called Sankhya. And he says, Eshate bihita Sankhye. This to you has been explained according to Sankhya, because I just told you not the body. Buddhi yoga tvimam shrinu. But now listen to this according to Buddhi yoga. And so now he's going to use the term yoga, that it will be defined. But it's not just the word yoga, it's Buddhi yoga, because he's saying don't just ignore what's happened, we're going to build on what we just said to the next thing. The same way a really systematic course builds on that. You learn something on the first day, and then you build on that thing on day 2, and you build on that on day 3, so that you start to have a working, comprehensive knowledge of what's going on. Buddhya yukto yaya parta karma bandham prahasyasi. You will give up your bondage to karma by yoking yourself to this buddhi. By yoking yourself to this buddhi, you will be able to give up to this worldview that I'm about to espouse. By yoking yourself to it, you'll be able to free yourself from karma. So now the passive idea of Sankhya didn't necessarily free you from karma. Krishna said if you can be tolerant, you become eligible. Amrita vaya kalpate, you become eligible for liberation. But he didn't say you become liberated. This is becoming liberated. When you take the idea that I'm not the body and you practice it in your life and you live your life according to that, that combination of a proper philosophy, the right mindset, and the right set of actions, that results in liberation. Therefore, there's an orthodoxy, a proper belief system, and an orthopraxy, a proper practice. It's faith and works, not one or the other. And so Krishna gave us the philosophical background, and now he's telling us, I'm going to teach you this new thing. And this new thing is called Buddhi Yoga, and it's 2.0. It's better than the first thing I taught you. It builds on the first thing. It's not a different idea. It's a better version of that idea. It's got all the good stuff that first idea had, but it's not incomplete like the first idea. It's the completion of it. I gave you a cognitive framework. Now I'm giving you a behavioral framework. Did you guys follow this? This, of course, is a philosophical version of what happened in the verse that precedes it. The verse that precedes it created a link between the previous section and the later section. I then said this verse is creating a link. It seams together these two different ideas. Krishna himself now is saying the same thing in much more philosophical language. His last statement was in layman's terms, in plain Sanskrit, without using philosophical language. Hey, in victory or loss, gain or defeat, happiness or distress, just be the same. Be the same, and you won't commit sin. Now he says, I have taught you Sankhya. Now listen as I teach you Buddhi Yoga. This Buddhi Yoga, karma bandham prahasyasi, it will release you from karma bandha. From the bondage to karma. The word bind in Sanskrit, abandha in Sanskrit, is where you get the word bind in English. Okay. I think I'll do one more. Do one more. In this endeavor, there's no loss or diminution, and a little advancement on this path can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear. Neha abhikrama nasha. Neha abhikrama nasha. There is not in this endeavor, in this beginning, in this action, there is no destruction, there's no loss. In this endeavor, there is no loss or diminution. Pratyavaya na vidite. You will not find any diminution in this. You will not find any loss in this. You will not find any reversal. Pratyavaya means reversal. It won't go away. You won't lose it. It won't be like quicksand. There won't be any inflation where you lose your wealth. Svalpam api asya dharmasya. In this dharma, even a little bit, su alpa, even a little bit of this dharma, dharmasya, asya, chayate mahato bayat, it will deliver you from great fear. When you introduce a new subject in a formal Sanskrit piece of literature, you glorify the subject before you introduce it. You tell the person how wonderful it's going to make their life if they follow what you say, if they do what you're telling them, they learn the subject. You inspire them. Oh, no one's ever heard this song before. This song just got released. I'm going to play this song. This song has never been played on our island before tonight. And then everybody listens up, and it piques their curiosity. This is a standard formulaic thing done in Sanskrit literature. And it's called a chatushtaya. There's other features of it as well. One of the features is you glorify the thing, and you tell the person what the result of it is, because it encourages them. Wow, this is far out. It makes people inspired to study. So we're being told that even a little bit of this dharma. Now that the idea of what Krishna's teaching is now dharmic. He's added the word dharma to the equation. So it's a dharmic thing he's teaching. And just a little bit of this dharma. Svalpam api asya dharmasya chahate mahato bhayat. It will deliver you from great fear. Don't be afraid. This is going to save you. This wisdom, this knowledge, this information, this worldview, this lifestyle, this practical application of this radical idea that you're not the body is going to make your life so much better. And so Krishna's encouraging Arjuna. Then he flips it and he discourages him. Those who are on this path are resolute in purpose, and their aim is one. The intelligence of those who are irresolute is many-branched. So now Krishna says, it might be really wonderful, but you got to focus. If you're all over the place and you're all spun out, you're not going to be able to get this, because you have to be resolute to get this. You have to be focused to get this. You have to be devoted to get this. This isn't cheap. So if you really want to have success in this, then you got to be focused. And so you see this dance back and forth. It's a great thing. It's a wonderful thing. It's a little bit, hey, don't think it's cheap. You got to focus. You see this, like it's a dexterous dance as Krishna's trying to intrigue us and get us to pay attention as he evolves to the next teaching. Thank you very much, IGTV.